Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad that y'all could join me once again. Today we're going to be studying Genesis 33. Yesterday we left off with Jacob wrestling with Jesus. As we all know, he wound up naming the land Peniel, which means face of God. And he said he's seen God face to face. The only way that you can do that and live is to see Jesus. So we do know that he just got through with meeting the greatest being that you could ever meet. Man, what a night. But right here, and he also had his name changed to Israel. So right here, we're seeing the confrontation that he's expecting between he and his brother Esau. Now, mind you, this was a 20-year buildup in which Jacob just dreaded. I bet. Have you ever left on bad terms with someone and then all of a sudden, it's been like 5 years, two or 3 years, and you haven't seen them since, and you have no idea how they're going to react, and you really left on horrible terms? Well, imagine 20 years of this. Not only that, have you ever had someone swear that they're going to kill you, and it's so bad, they're so angry that you actually leave hundreds of miles away? That's what Jacob was facing. This is 20 years later, so he doesn't really know what to expect. And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau came, and with him 400 men. And he divided the children unto Leah, and unto Rachel, and unto the two handmaids. And he put the handmaids and their children foremost, his concubines foremost, and Leah and her children after, and Rachel and Joseph hindermost. This was, I don't know if any of you remember MySpace, but in MySpace you had like your top 10 friend list, and you would put them in order. It was just a terrible idea because it created so much animosity between friends. Well, I thought I was your best friend, and this is what this reminds me of. This was like the first Facebook thing. No, but he puts the concubines first with their children, and then he puts Leah and her children second. All of these are his children, by the way. And then he puts Rachel and Joseph last. I mean, that's another level of favoritism right there. Not a slick move. I wouldn't have done it. And he passed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. Now notice this. And he passed over before them. Now, the day before, he had them pass over the river, Jabbok. So he had them pass over first, while he lingered behind, terrified. And he wrestled with Christ that night. So here we're seeing, after wrestling with Christ, after that, suddenly he is filled with tons of courage. He passed over before them. Now he's leading his own camp. So the night before was a tremendous night of growth. But he goes and he bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. This would have been an unnecessary step had he. I fully believe that if Jacob and Rebekah had not intervened between Isaac's attempt to bless Esau over Jacob, I fully believe that if they would have just stayed out of it 20 years earlier, that God's will would have come to pass. And who's to say how that would have happened? But you have to remember something. Keep this in clear mind, okay? Because before Isaac, now this is sheer theory on my part, but before Isaac blesses Esau, he tells him to go hunting. Now, that's whenever Rebekah and Jacob intervened and tricked Isaac. But if they hadn't have intervened, pure theory, may never have happened. But I'm going to say this. I believe that something may have happened to Esau whenever he was hunting. I don't know what, but notice how that Esau had to go and do something. He had to go away from the camp, and who knows what would have happened if they would have just not intervened. But because they intervened, because they were tricking Isaac, because they wanted to play the part of God, it appears like God has allowed that to hang over them. And I don't know, maybe it all worked out the exact way that God wanted it to. I don't know, but it doesn't seem to me like they were so much trusting God as they were their own abilities to gain the birthright and such. But what Jacob has already done, real quick note, reminder, what Jacob has done before this is he's lavished drove after drove of gifts upon Esau, trying to appease him, trying to assuage that anger that he may or may not have built up within him. And now we see him not only lavishing him with gifts, but he's also submitting himself. So he's showing himself as beneath Esau now. He's having to he call himself his servant and such and bow to him. He never would have had to have done this, I believe, if he hadn't have intervened 20 years before. And for any in whom believe that Esau may have not have had ill intent in meeting Jacob, why, tell me, go and meet with 400 men? That's hundreds of men. That's almost as many as was in my school whenever I was in high school. And so why in the world would he choose to do that if he didn't have any kind of hostility in his heart? But then we see something very peculiar happen. And Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. I'm not going to lie. Whenever I was getting this presentation together yesterday, I teared up a little bit in reading that because I know how that must have felt. That's 20 years of a load on your shoulders that's just been excruciating to hold up mentally and emotionally. And now all of a sudden that feeling's just drained. You can only imagine the feeling of euphoria that was released with both of them, knowing that you see how much better peace is than war. Peace is it's so much sweeter than war. And I love it that Jesus is called the Prince of Peace. I mean, imagine if he was, I've said this before many times, imagine if God was evil. Imagine if he just wanted to create us and then just kill us over and over and over again. But he doesn't. He wants us to have peace. I'm so thankful that God is God because he's the best of all of us. Every one of us, we're nothing without him. I believe that this is a perfect example of what Solomon said in Proverbs 16:7. When a man's ways please the Lord, he maketh even his enemies to be at peace with him. Not only did Esau forgive Jacob, but he came up and wept, ran to him. Now this is what God can do to a man's, even his most hate-filled enemy. And in the New Testament we read from Simon Peter, First Peter 3:13, and who is he that will harm you, if ye be followers of that which is good? But and if ye suffer for righteousness' sake, happy are ye, and be not afraid of their terror, neither be troubled. That's a very difficult thing to do, isn't it? It's very difficult to not be intimidated. It's a very difficult thing to not be afraid, because it's our instincts to just, all we've ever known is life. Therefore, we don't want to die. We don't want harm to come to us because of the threat of death. Ultimately, it's because of the threat of death, but also we're afraid of pain and suffering and such. But I do believe that this right here, and be not afraid of their terror, neither be troubled, I believe that we'll fully understand that whenever we get to heaven. Why we should have fully believed that. Because I believe that there is something beyond this life that is just so much sweeter, so much greater. And I believe that's the reason why the Bible emphasizes constantly. I mean, it's a constant reminder over and over. Be not afraid. Don't be afraid. I am with you. Even in the valley of the shadow of death, thou art with me. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. God tells his children that constantly. Everything will be fine. You'll see. You'll have to go through a little bit of hardships down here, but everything will ultimately be great. Trust me. And he lifted up his eyes and saw the women and the children, and said, Who are those with thee? This is Esau speaking to Jacob. And he said, The children which God hath graciously given thy servant. Still referring to himself as a servant. He's still afraid of Esau. Then the handmaidens came near, they and their children, and they bowed themselves. And Leah also with her children came near and bowed themselves. And after came Joseph near and Rachel, and they bowed themselves. And he said, What meanest thou by all this drove which I met, all these gifts that he tried to lavish upon him? And he said, These are to find grace in the sight of my Lord. This also goes right back to the verse where it says, And a gentle answer turneth away wrath. I often tell people, don't repay evil for evil. Don't if a man's belittling you, if he's raging against you, just maintain your peace. Remember what Christ did in the trial. Just maintain your peace. If you know that you're in the right, especially, just let it be. Don't worry about him. Let him work that out. God will pay him back. Genesis 33:9. And Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep that thou hast unto thyself. Very, very gracious on Esau's part, but also speaks of how he was also blessed. This is how wealthy Esau was. He didn't want Jacob's gifts. He didn't need them. He said, I have enough. You keep them. And Jacob said, Nay, I pray thee, if now I have found grace in thy sight, then receive my present at my hand. Now therefore I have seen thy face as though I had seen the face of God, and thou wast pleased with me. The meaning behind this was much like how we have an anticipation of seeing God one day. Jesus says, Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Much how we have that anticipation, I bet you that Jacob had a fraction of that for Esau. I believe that may be what he's trying to get at right there, because he's so glad once that he sees that Esau's happy with him, and just as we'll be so glad. And the night before, he did see the face of God. So, I mean, I might be just connecting dots it shouldn't be. Take, I pray thee, my blessing that is brought to thee, because God hath dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. And he urged him, and he took it. So Jacob's urging him, please take it. Please take all these gifts that I've given you. And Esau says, fine, I'll take it. It's almost a way of assuring that this happiness remains in Esau, because every time that he sees how much wealth that he has and how much he's prospered since seeing his brother Jacob, then that's a way of balancing out this anger and this love that he has for him, so just gifts. And he said, Let us take our journey, and let us go, and I will go before thee. This is Esau talking to Jacob. He's saying, Okay, well, let us go, brother. And he said unto him, My Lord knoweth that the children are tender, and the flocks and herds with young are with me, and if men should overdrive them one day, all the flock will die. He's talking about how the children are not grown enough. They're still weak. They're still boys. And the flocks and herd with young are with me. And he says, I have to watch over these right here. So I think that he's trying to make up an excuse not to go with his brother. Let my Lord, I pray thee, pass over before his servant, and I will lead on softly, according as the cattle that goeth before me, and the children be able to endure until I come unto my Lord, unto Seir. So he's saying, I'll catch up with you. That's the long way of saying I'll catch up with you. Now, right up in this area is where they're talking. And Bethel is where God actually wants Jacob to go. Esau lives way down here near where Sodom and Gomorrah were. And Esau said, Let me now leave with thee some of the folk that are with me. And he said, What needeth it? Let me find grace in the sight of my Lord. This is extremely gracious of Esau, because he's being told by Jacob, well, if you fear that you're going to be overran by anyone, he said, let me leave some of my men with you, and they'll help you guard your children, your flock, and such. And Jacob says, no need. You just going down there. Jacob's not really worried about anything, because he knows that God will protect him. He just doesn't want to be neighbors to his brother. And I mean, justifiably. So Esau returned that day on his way into Seir. And Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built him a house and made booths for his cattle. Therefore, the name of the place is called Succoth. And Succoth means booth. It's a kind of a place to keep cattle next to a living space or a place of worship, even. So he's kind of settling down, and God told him to be a sojourner, meaning you'll walk about the land. You're not supposed to settle until I say it's time to settle. And he's trying to settle right here, and we'll see in the next chapter how this is to his detriment. And Jacob came to Shalom, a city of Shechem. Now we're going to be focused a lot on Shechem in the next chapter, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padanaram and pitched his tent before the city. And he bought a parcel of a field where he had spread his tent at the hand of the children of Hanor. He'll come up in the next chapter, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. And he erected there an altar and called it Elel Lohe Israel, meaning God, the God of Israel. And that is it for the short chapter of Genesis 33. Tomorrow we're going to be focusing on Dinah and what happened, the terrible, terrible thing that happens to her in Shechem. Until then, Lord be with you all. Amen.